Happiness is a function of expectations. And I want you to remember that when we talk about the Indian release of the K20 Pro and why people seem to be so unhappy. Hey, my name is Mitchell. Before we start talking about this, I want to thank everyone that uses my affiliate links. Without your support, we couldn't keep the channel going. Also, I'm going to make this available in podcast form, just as kind of a short podcast to get you through the week. I've been a lot more active on Twitter recently. I'll have a link to my Twitter down below. Also, I started a XiaomItography user-generated content Instagram page. I'd love to see more of your Xiaomi taken photos that you take with the Xiaomi Redmi device. Check that stuff out down below. You guys know the drill. If you're looking for written content, check the website. You guys want to chat, hit the Telegram group. Let's just hop into this. So before we start talking about the Indian launch of the K20 Pro, I want to take us back to last year, around the launch of the Poco F1. Xiaomi launched the Poco brand specifically for India around a campaign that was essentially centered around speed and giving people the fastest user experience for the cheapest price. Now, selling a phone based on performance and based on speed is something that's pretty easy to do. Speed, responsiveness is something that can be measured pretty objectively with a device, with speed tests and with benchmarks. So being able to sell people a phone that objectively is giving them the same performance, the same user experience from a speed point of view as a flagship is pretty easy, right? And so because of that, Xiaomi was able to sell the Poco F1 as a flagship killer. Ignore the other aspects of the Poco F1, but at the time of its launch, it's unarguable that in benchmarks and gaming and stuff like that, the device was measurably as fast or faster than its rivals. But this is a tangible thing. This is something that we can demonstrate. This is something that we can measure. Now, when Xiaomi labeled this the flagship killer, they were able to point directly to a objective benchmark. Now, with the launch and the buildup of the launch of the Redmi K20 Pro, they were saying, believe the hype. They were talking about this being the flagship killer 2.0. In fact, they were saying that the K20 name stood for flagship killer 2.0. And using that kind of language and that kind of marketing around the device led people to believe, or assume at least, that we were again going to have a phone that could objectively be as fast or faster than flagships at that mid-range price. Fast forward to the launch day, and in India, starting price was 26,000 rupees for the base variant of the K20 Pro, or around there. And with some flash sales and with some other discounts, the device was between $50 to $75 more if you put the money down on the alpha sale than the previous Poco F1. But that's not what people were expecting. Because of the marketing and because of the language Xiaomi was using, people were expecting another device that could objectively beat other flagships. They tried to revert back to some of this in the press conference, saying that this is the fastest phone on the market right now. And while it is fast, it's not coming in at that rock bottom price point, at least in India. And this isn't to say that the device is good, bad, or anything else. We're just talking about marketing. The expectation was set for an objectively faster phone, but things such as a notchless display aren't necessarily of value or aren't necessarily objectively better than other things. Glass on both sides isn't objectively better, because most people's argument when the Poco came out is that who cares if it's plastic? It's all the same in the case anyway. coming back to the K20 Pro, people that were unhappy with this price are saying, who cares that it's glass? I'm gonna put it in a case anyway. But Xiaomi and Redmi using these other added features to sell the phone make it objectively harder to sell. The K20 Pro and the Poco F1, they both have the flagship processor that is around at their given time. Both of them have the best camera sensor that's currently offered, Sony IMX586. Trying to sell people that an AMOLED display is going to necessarily change their interaction with the device or change how fast it is or change their performance is kind of difficult to do. So this isn't to say that this is a bad phone. I've never said that this is a bad phone. I've said it's a phone with some issues, but that doesn't make it bad. But here we are, we have petitions circulating online in India to lower the price of the K20 Pro. We have people talking about the Realme X being the real flagship killer, even though it's got a Snapdragon 7 series processor. And overall, we kind of have some very vocal disappointment. This was such a big deal, at least in India, that Redmi published a letter, like an open kind of apology letter, essentially stating all of the reasons that this was a great phone and that why this was a great buy. And in marketing and in business, having to convince your consumers that your product is a good deal is never a good sign. In this letter, they talked about the Horizon AMOLED display and the pop-up camera and a lot of these other kind of very marketing-centric features, when in reality, it seems like the reaction that we're getting in India about this is we want the best processor at the cheapest price, we want the best camera sensor at the cheapest price, and you know, maybe the screen is something that is a buying point for some people, but I think a lot of the reality is that if Xiaomi had just given us a Pocophone F1 with an AMOLED display, Snapdragon 855, plastic build, IMX568, and priced it at 20,000 rupees, people wouldn't have been angry. Now, it's important to remember what I said before about happiness being a function of expectations. And with the marketing and with how this device has launched in India, the expectation for it, especially coming from the Redmi brand, was really, really high. And let me explain why, at least from the Redmi side of things, this is such a big deal, or why people are making it such a big deal. In India, Redmi is the sub-brand of Xiaomi that is known for just making the cheapest stuff. You want the most CPU in a device, you want the best camera in a device, you want the most pure performance, regardless of screen or build quality. Generally, the Redmi brand is the brand you go with. So for Redmi to release basically a flagship, right? We could just call this a sub $500 flagship, because I think that would be an accurate assessment that this is the most flagship you're gonna get at around the $450 mark, under 500 bucks. So for Redmi to launch an outright flagship under the $500 mark, when people are expecting a device from Redmi that's going to be below the perceived flagship price in India, it just wasn't gonna happen. I think if this had launched under the Xiaomi brand in India and not the Redmi brand, and this was just a Mi 9T Pro, in many ways, I think that it would have been received better because the perception of the Redmi brand in India is that it's the cheapest possible product you can get, whereas the brand perception of Xiaomi in India is that Xiaomi is more premium products at a very reasonable price, which is essentially what this device is. It's a very premium product at a very reasonable price. It's not that they screwed up with the launch, they just set the expectation wrong. Launching this device as a Redmi device, as well as labeling it a flagship killer 2.0, when they really should have just launched it as a flagship, or India's first flagship, or India's best value flagship. Those would have all been things that would have set the expectation of a slightly higher price, great performance, good build quality, not great, and a lot of other kind of minor features like the glass back and stuff like that. I did a poll on my YouTube community page, and if you guys don't check out the community page very often, I oftentimes do post stuff, and we got nearly 650 responses on that poll. And the options of that poll were, the question was the Redmi K20 Pro overpriced? Around 35 to 40% of the people said yes. Around 40% of the people said no. And then the other option I had was, I'm going to buy a OnePlus device. Even though on paper, everything except the UFS 2.1 versus the UFS 3.0 storage on the K20 Pro is better than the OnePlus 7 non-Pro, the fact of the matter remains that people look at OnePlus as a more premium brand, more premium materials, a user experience that people don't have to modify or tweak with custom ROMs, and never any advertisements. Now, this is something that I think is kind of hurting Redmi, because since this was launched under the Redmi brand, people were expecting advertisements, which is something that you won't get on the OnePlus device in India. You won't ever get advertisements on OnePlus devices. When the K20 was launched, the specific verbiage and the specific wording from Xiaomi Redmi on this device was no display ads. And a lot of people instantly assumed that that was going to mean ads in other places, and now we kind of know that Redmi is going to have some type of advertisement in the K20 Pro. Even though they could have just undercut OnePlus by, let's say, $300, launched it at a starting price of 27 or 28,000 rupees with the 6128, and just basically given you a device that was similar to the OnePlus 7 Pro at half the price, they chose not to do that and kind of go with this middle ground of devices under the 30,000 rupee mark, but still with advertisements. So maybe not the most flagship experience. And just what I saw as a response on my YouTube poll and on Twitter, link to my Twitter down below, people are really divided about whether or not this device is fairly priced. And this brings me to asking you guys, do you think this device is fairly priced? I'm not gonna say what I think of it, although most people already know I think it's a pretty fair device. But I want to know if you think it's fair. Should they have launched it under the Redmi brand? Should they have launched it under the Xiaomi brand? How do you think it should have launched in India? Sound off in the comments. If you guys want to see some travel vlogs I filmed with this device, I'll have links to that stuff right over here. I'll have a review of the Redmi AirDots and why you shouldn't buy the Redmi AirDots over here. I'll have my favorite headphones at the same price range linked right here. And as always, I'm going to be making this available on different podcast platforms just so you guys can hear a little more dialogue and get an audio version if you want. Okay, till next time, it's been Mitchell. See you soon.